The rain sounded wrong that night. It wasn't gentle or steady, or anything close to comforting. It hammered against the hospital's metal awning like a warning, urgent and insistent. Each drop a sharp reminder that something precious was slipping away. David Cole burst through the sliding doors, shoes slapping against the wet floor, his breath cutting in and out like someone had punched the air from his lungs. 7 years earlier, he was 29 and still believed the world was hard but fair. That night taught him otherwise. "Lila," he gasped to the nurse at the counter. "My wife, she's collapsing. She's pregnant. Please tell me she's in here." His voice cracked in places he didn't know could break. The nurse typed quickly, the clacking keys echoing sharp and clinical. "Cole? Lila Cole. She was brought in a few minutes ago. They've taken her to emergency 1. David leaned over the counter, soaked through water dripping from his sleeves onto the polished tile. "Is she okay? Can I go back there?" Before she answered, a man from billing stepped forward with a clipboard. His tone was flat, not unkind, but disturbingly practiced. "Sir, we need to verify your insurance." David fumbled through his wallet with trembling fingers. The plastic cards slipped twice before he managed to push them across the counter. The machine beeped. Fingers tapped keys again. Papers slid into a printer. Then came the sentence that would live in David's nightmares for years. "I'm sorry, sir," the billing clerk said. "The procedure she needs is not covered under your plan." A pause. A long, cold pause. David felt the world tilt beneath him. What do you mean, not covered?" "She's collapsing. She can barely breathe. It's listed as a non-qualifying emergency under Sterling Health's adjusted policy." The clerk didn't even lower his voice. "We'll need an upfront payment if the team proceeds. She doesn't have time for this." David's voice rose loud enough that 2 people in the waiting room turned. "Charge the card. Charge all of them. I don't care about interest or fees. Just save her." More typing. A frown. Another slip of paper printed out with a crisp snap. Declined. David swallowed a tremor of panic. "Run it again." "It won't change the policy determination," the clerk replied. "I'm sorry." The words were mechanical, memorized, used too often. Behind the double doors, something beeped, first steady, then irregular, then stretching into a single awful tone that sliced through the air like a blade. David's knees almost gave out. "No," he whispered, staggering toward the doors. No, Lila." A doctor stepped out, face drawn tight, mask hanging loose around his neck. His eyes said everything before his mouth could form the words. "We did everything we could. There are moments in life when the world goes silent. When sound disappears, replaced by a ringing so thin and sharp, it feels like grief growing a voice." David heard that ringing now. He didn't feel the chair he sank into, didn't feel the cold tiles beneath his palms, didn't feel the wedding ring sliding from his shaking fingers and hitting the floor with a faint metallic ping that somehow echoed louder than anything else in the room. His daughter, tiny, premature, fighting for every breath, was alive. His wife was not. And the sheet of paper with the Sterling Health logo lay on the counter, still warm from the printer. He never forgot that logo. Not the shape, not the font, not the way the ink bled slightly at the edges from the rain dripping off his jacket. It became a brand burned into his mind, and into the rest of his life. The funeral was small because grief shrinks the world. The air smelled of wet soil and cedar, the kind of scent that settles into clothes and memory alike. David stood under a gray sky, cradling the infant carrier with one arm, his other hand resting on Lila's casket, as if he could somehow anchor her to this earth a moment longer. "I'll take care of her," he whispered. "Emma will grow up knowing she was loved. And I won't forget the name on that paper. I won't forget what it cost us." The wind carried his words away, but the promise stayed. 7 years later. The world had kept moving. Bills came, jobs changed, rent rose. And David Cole, once a young husband with plans and optimism, now pushed a heavy floor scrubber across the marble tiles of a corporate skyscraper. The machine hummed steady and low, vibrating through the handle into his palms. The citrus scent of industrial cleaner hung in the air. His boots squeaked when he shifted. And above him, glowing in polished steel, hung the emblem he could recognize even in the dark Sterling Group. Parent company of Sterling Health. The same logo he'd stared at the night his world ended. Now he cleaned floors for them. He didn't mention the irony to anyone. Didn't tell coworkers the truth. Some wounds close on the surface and keep bleeding underneath. Tonight was like every night, late shift quiet building the distant hum of HVAC through long hallways. But as he approached the executive conference room, the silence cracked. Two voices drifted through the cracked doorway, one sharp, one smooth. "If Aurora can't show a stable family image," said the sharp one, low and cutting, "we can invoke Father's will and remove her." David froze mid-step. The scrubber hummed at his feet. Victor Sterling. The brother. The vulture always circling the top seat. Another voice responded, firmer, colder. Hard to make out the words, but the cadence held authority. Aurora. The CEO. David didn't dare move. The cleaner machine's motor seemed suddenly too loud, as though it shouted his presence into the hallway. His pulse thudded in his ears. Tension pricked the back of his neck. Remove her. A stable family image. Why did those words feel dangerous? He looked up at the Sterling logo again. After all these years, it still raised the same chill he felt on the night Lila died. He tightened his grip on the scrubber handle. Something was shifting in this building, something that touched the same part of his life he'd fought so hard to protect. He didn't know how or why, but the air felt charged, like the moment before a storm breaks open. And he was standing right beneath it. As the footsteps inside the conference room grew louder, heading closer to the door, David's breath caught. Whatever storm was coming, it had already begun. The next morning, the Sterling Tower felt different, too bright, too quiet. Overnight rain had dried on the glass facade, leaving faint mineral streaks that caught the morning hum of traffic below. Inside, the halls echoed with a sharpness that made every sound feel amplified, as if the whole building were holding its breath. David pushed his supply cart along the marble corridor, the smooth wheels clicking lightly at each tile transition. He kept replaying the voices he'd overheard the night before. Something about removing her. Something about family image. Things that had nothing to do with janitors or floor polish, but somehow tugged threads from the same knot of his past. He didn't want to care. But some warnings don't sound like warnings until much later. Upstairs in the executive conference room, Aurora Sterling stood tall, even though fatigue weighed at her shoulders. Her voice carried a crisp edge as she spoke to the board, an edge sharpened more by duty than desire. "We are stabilizing Sterling Health's public trust," she said. "And we're implementing a new tier of patient protections. We are not repeating mistakes of the past." The word mistakes hung briefly. No one else seemed to hear the sting in it. Victor, seated across from her, leaned back in his chair with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Your compassion is admirable," he said in a tone dipped in honey and vinegar. "But shareholders care about numbers. And frankly, Aurora, you've been distracted." Aurora didn't flinch, but her fingers tightened around her pen. "I'm not distracted. I'm repairing what needed to be repaired." Victor tapped the table lightly. "And yet still no family, no partner, nothing to prove stability. Father built this empire on traditional values." Her jaw set. "Father ruled through fear," she replied. "I plan to lead differently." Gasps rippled around the table, but she didn't back down. Victor's eyes glinted. "We'll see how that works out for you." After the meeting, Aurora stepped into the grand hallway, high ceilings, wide windows, the soft drone of the HVAC pushing cool air downward. Her heels clicked sharply with every step, echoing through the empty corridor like a metronome of pressure. Her mind churned with silent calculations, contingencies, and the shadows of her father's expectations. She walked quickly, not wanting to feel the vulnerability creeping in behind her ribs. As she turned a corner, she nearly brushed past David, who was kneeling to repolish a scuff left by someone's expensive leather shoe. He lowered his gaze automatically. She didn't even realize the faint breeze of her passing stirred the paper towel in his hand. Two worlds crossing in a hallway, one too busy to notice another trying not to be seen. Later in the underground parking garage, raised voices cut through the humming fluorescent lights. An older janitor, Mr. Hollis, nearly 70, stood trembling next to a maintenance closet. A security guard towered over him. "You left the valve loose," the guard barked. "The leak could have flooded half the garage. We could fire you for this." The old man stammered. No, sir. I closed it. I always—" David stepped forward before he fully thought it through. "It wasn't him," he said. "That valve's been corroding for weeks. I reported it 2 days ago. It finally snapped. That's on the building, not on him." The guard frowned. "You're willing to take responsibility for this?" David nodded. "I'll take my part of it. But don't blame him because he's the easiest target." The words echoed soft but steady. Mr. Hollis looked at him with wet eyes. The guard, irritated but lacking counterproof, backed off with a grunt. "Fine. I'll write it up as a mechanical fault." David exhaled slowly as the old man grasped his arm. "You didn't have to do that, son." "I know," David answered quietly. But it was right. Hours later, Aurora sat in her office reviewing security footage her assistant had flagged for her. A camera angle in the garage. David stepping forward. A janitor standing up to a guard. A simple act of decency in a world that rarely rewarded it. "He's the same guy from the hall this morning?" she asked. "Yes." Her assistant nodded. "Night shift janitor, David Cole." Aurora watched the clip again, slowing it down, studying not the act itself, but the posture, shoulders, tight mouth, set eyes, determined but tired. A man who didn't know the cameras were rolling. A man who acted because something inside him couldn't look away. "And he has a daughter?" Aurora asked. "That's what HR records show." She leaned back. Victor's words from the morning resurfaced like bile. No family. No partner. Nothing stable. But here was a man who clearly had a core, one built not on legacy or power, but on responsibility. Still, she didn't yet understand why the image stuck with her the rest of the day. That evening, as David rolled his cart toward the exit, headlights swept across the garage entrance. A small girl ran toward him, with little footsteps tapping the concrete. Daddy Emma leapt into his arms with a soft squeal. Her breathing wheezed faintly against his shoulder, something David noticed instinctively. "Hey, Bug," he whispered. "I'm almost done." Aurora happened to be on the balcony 1 floor above the garage, an architectural walkway of steel and glass overlooking the lot. She paused mid-stride when she heard the little girl's voice echo upward. Then she heard David's reply. "We'll pick up your medicine on the way home." "Okay, medicine." A daughter. A gentle father's voice. Something clicked, not emotional, not warm. Strategic. Her breath caught in the chill of the night air as an idea formed. A dangerous idea. A necessary one. Emma's laugh floated upward through the metal rails, soft and sweet, like a sound this cold building had never earned, but somehow received. Aurora's mind sharpened. A man with no ties to their world. A man the board wouldn't expect. A man with a child, an instant family image. A man clean enough, honest enough to use. The thought chilled her even as it rooted itself. Her reflection on the balcony glass stared back at her, half in shadow, half in ambition. She whispered to herself, almost horrified by her own calculation. He has a daughter. A family picture that's stable enough to leverage. She closed her eyes. This wasn't her. Or maybe it was the version her father built. Either way, the decision had already begun to take shape. Aurora turned away from the balcony with a clipped breath, her heels echoing through the hall like the beginning of something irrevocable. And below her, unaware, David held his daughter close, never imagining that his life had just brushed up against a storm far larger than he could possibly see. David never liked the executive elevator. It whispered instead of rattled, moved without a shudder, and smelled faintly of expensive wood polish. Nothing in his life moved this quietly. Nothing in his life smelled like this. He kept adjusting the strap of his worn work bag as the lift ascended. Each soft ding made his stomach tighten further. A janitor didn't get called to the top floor unless something was wrong. Maybe Victor complained. Maybe security filed a report. Maybe... The doors slid open with a hush. A corridor stretched ahead, carpeted silent, the kind of quiet that made every breath feel too loud. When he stepped inside Aurora Sterling's office, he felt the change immediately. It wasn't the size. It wasn't the glass walls that overlooked the entire city. It was the sound or lack of it. The hum of air conditioning seemed softer here, more deliberate. Even his footsteps felt muted, swallowed by the plush flooring. This was a world where noise had to justify itself. Aurora stood near the window, hands clasped behind her back. She didn't turn to greet him. For a moment, all he heard was the deep, distant whoosh of wind brushing against the panoramic glass. "Mr. Cole," she said. "Have a seat." Her tone didn't invite questions, so he didn't ask any. He sat on the edge of the sleek leather chair, spine stiff, heart ticking a little too fast. Aurora finally faced him. Her expression was controlled, unreadable, but there was a shadow under her eyes. Exhaustion or calculation or something between. "I'll get straight to the point," she said. Of course she would. "I'm facing a challenge that threatens my position as CEO. The board is traditional. They expect a certain image of stability, particularly around family." The word family tugged something inside David. He kept still. Aurora stepped closer, her heels clicking lightly on the polished floor. "You have a daughter. You present yourself well. You've shown character. And you're not tied to our world, no corporate baggage, no political alliances. That makes you useful." "Useful?" David repeated, feeling his jaw tighten. "Yes," she said, completely unfazed by his reaction. "Useful." He waited, even though something cold had already begun moving through him. "I want you." She continued to pose as my husband. Silence. Deep, ringing silence. David blinked once. Twice. "I'm sorry, what?" "It's a strategic arrangement. Temporary. 6 months, perhaps less. There will be events, photo appearances, dinners. You and your daughter will live at my residence for the duration." He felt as if the floor had shifted under his feet. Aurora walked to her desk and placed a document in front of him. He didn't touch it, but the stiff rustle of the paper was loud enough. "In return," she said, "I will pay off every debt you have. I'll cover all medical expenses for your daughter, current and future. I'll ensure her education is fully funded. And you'll receive substantial compensation for your participation." David stared at her. "You're asking me to lie to the entire world," he said slowly. "To pretend to be your husband." "I'm asking for cooperation," she corrected. "A mutually beneficial agreement." He stood up abruptly. "You're trying to buy me." "No," she said calmly. "I'm offering you a contract and an opportunity." He let out a sharp breath. "Do you hear yourself? You think people are pieces you can move around on a board. You think everything has a price." For the first time, a flicker of something not quite guilt, not quite vulnerability crossed her features. "I'm doing what's necessary to prevent someone unfit from taking over this company," she said. "If Victor gains control, tens of thousands of employees will suffer. Entire communities relying on our hospitals will face cuts. I'm not asking for romance or devotion, or even trust. I'm asking for a partnership built on reality." Reality. He gave a short, humorless laugh. "There's nothing real about any of this." She didn't deny it, and that somehow stung more. David stepped away from the desk, trying to steady his breathing. His pulse throbbed in his ears, louder than the air vents, louder than the city far below. "You can keep your money," he said. "I'm not a prop." Her voice softened, just barely. "This isn't about making you a prop. It's about survival for both of us." He didn't answer. He just walked out, Later that night in the cramped apartment he and Emma shared, the world felt even smaller. The refrigerator hummed weakly. A draft crept through the window frame. Emma sat on the couch wrapped in a worn blanket, her breathing slightly wheezy. "Daddy," she whispered, "are we poor?" The question pierced him deeper than anything Aurora had said. He knelt beside her, brushing a curl from her forehead. "We're okay, sweetheart." But she looked at him with an honesty that children have, an honesty that didn't need words. He checked the medicine box. Only a few inhaler doses left. Insurance had rejected the last refill request. Again. He sat at the small kitchen table long after she fell asleep. His fingers brushed the contract Aurora had handed him. The paper felt too heavy, like it carried the weight of a moral debt he wasn't sure he could pay. He remembered Lila's grave. He remembered the promise he'd made. He remembered the night he held Emma for the first time, fragile and fighting for every breath. A father does whatever it takes, even if it breaks something inside him. The next morning, David stood outside Aurora's office again, this time taller, though no less afraid. His hand hovered above the doorknob. His heartbeat drummed in his ears. When he stepped inside, Aurora looked up with guarded expectation. David sat down quietly. Then slowly he met her eyes. "I'll do it," he said, "but we need one condition." Aurora's posture straightened. "Name it." "My daughter is not part of your boardroom games," he said. "She doesn't get pushed photographed without permission or used to soften your image. She's a child. She gets protected. Always." Aurora held his gaze for a long moment. A beat. Another. Then she nodded. "Deal." She picked up the pen and signed her name. The click of the pen echoed, and the sound felt like a lock sliding into place, a door opening or maybe closing. David exhaled, barely realizing he had been holding his breath. The contract lay between them, signed and alive. Somewhere deep inside, a quiet instinct whispered, "This choice will cost you more than you know." Moving into Aurora Sterling's world didn't feel like stepping upward. It felt like stepping sideways into a place where the air behaved differently. On the morning they arrived at the Sterling estate, a pair of gates opened with a soft hydraulic sigh, like the house itself was deciding whether to let them in. The driveway was so smooth, Emma whispered, "Daddy, it's quieter than the library floor." She wasn't wrong. Their footsteps barely made a sound. The front door opened before they reached it. Assistants greeted them with polite efficiency, their shoes clicking in synchronized patterns along the polished stone. Their voices felt trained, gentle, but distant, like the whole house had an etiquette manual no one dared deviate from. Emma's small backpack thumped once against the marble. That single sound echoed more honestly than anything else in the room. "This way, Mr. Cole," an assistant said, guiding David deeper inside. "Ms. Sterling has arranged orientation for both of you." Orientation. Like they were new employees in her world. David had expected the house to feel extravagant. He hadn't expected it to feel cold. Not unwelcoming, just empty in a way he recognized from hospital hallways. Quiet, polished, intentionally numb. Emma stared wide-eyed at the grand staircase. "Daddy, is this where princesses live?" David smoothed her hair. "Maybe. But we're just visiting, okay? 6 months." She nodded, only half understanding. A moment later, David was ushered into a bright room with a long table. A woman with perfect posture and a voice that glided like satin greeted him. "I'm Evelyn," she said. "Etiquette and image specialist." "Image," David echoed. "For your upcoming appearances with Ms. Sterling," she explained. "We'll cover posture, conversational cues table, protocol, and wardrobe." Great, he thought. Lessons on how not to embarrass the billionaire. The next 2 hours were a blur of corrections. Sit straighter. No elbows on the table. Fork in the left hand, knife in the right. No, that's the salad fork. Your tie is crooked. Try smiling without tightening your jaw. At one point, he muttered under his breath, "I mop floors for a living, not run for office." Evelyn responded without missing a beat. "For the next 6 months, Mr. Cole, you do both." Across the room, Aurora stood silently beside an assistant reviewing schedules on a tablet. She didn't interfere, didn't react though once when he dropped a fork for the third time and muttered an apology. He could have sworn she bit back a smile. Not mockery. Something softer. Something almost human. Meanwhile, Emma was led to a spacious bedroom with tall windows and a bed she could barely climb onto. Everything was pristine, white silver ivory. Beautiful, but soulless. She turned in a slow circle, whispering, "Where are the colors?" Within an hour, she began taping her crayon drawings on the wall, lining stuffed animals along the pillows, arranging her blankets in a cocoon that looked more like home. When she finished, she grabbed Aurora's hand, bold, unfiltered, and pulled her into the room. "Look, I made it warm." Aurora stiffened at the unexpected touch. She rarely let people get physically close. But Emma's small fingers slipped trustingly between hers, and for a moment, Aurora didn't know how to respond. "It's nice," Aurora managed, though her voice sounded rusty, like she was using a word she'd learned long ago but seldom practiced. Emma nodded confidently. It was too empty before. Rooms need love in them. Aurora blinked, caught completely off guard. She didn't argue. That evening, they gathered for the first official family dinner. The dining room was large enough to host a dozen guests, yet only 3 sat at the table. The ticking of a distant antique clock felt louder than it should. Silverware clinked in neat rhythm. Aurora's precise, David's careful, Emma's chaotic. Emma broke the silence first. "Ms. Aurora, do you always eat alone?" Aurora froze mid-bite. The question hit her like cold water. "Most nights," she said softly. Why Emma asked pure curiosity. Aurora opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. She looked genuinely unprepared. David watched her struggle, surprised at the vulnerability flickering beneath her polished exterior. "My work takes time," Aurora finally said. "A lot of time." Emma nodded thoughtfully. "Do you have a mom and dad?" David inhaled sharply. "Emma, it's okay." Aurora cut in quiet but steady. "My mother passed away when I was young. My father believed emotions made people weak." The room held its breath. David glanced at her not with judgment, but recognition. Grief recognized grief. Pressure recognized pressure. Emma swung her legs and said, "Well, you can eat with us now. We're not weak." Aurora stared at the little girl, something warm cracking through her shield. "No," she whispered. "You're not." Later that night, Emma woke crying from a nightmare. David hurried from his room, but Aurora was already there, kneeling beside the girl's bed, murmuring soft reassurances. Her voice, stripped of corporate steel, carried a gentleness she rarely let out. Emma clung to Aurora's silk sleeve. "Stay." Aurora hesitated only a second. "Yes, I'm here." David stood in the hallway, watching a strange ache forming behind his ribs. It scared him how natural they looked in that moment. How dangerous that softness could be if he let himself believe in it. Unable to sleep, David wandered through the dim hallways. The house creaked differently at night, less like a mansion, more like a museum of someone's childhood that never got lived. He passed Aurora's private study. The door cracked open. A sliver of moonlight cut through the room, glinting off a metal emblem on a filing cabinet. The Sterling Health logo. His blood ran cold. A folder lay partially pulled out as if someone had hastily looked through it earlier. David approached slowly, his breath thick in his throat. He knew that logo too well. He knew that paper too well. His fingers brushed the edge of the file. Inside were forms, insurance policy revisions implemented 7 years ago. His heart thudded painfully. 7 years. The same year Lila died. He swallowed hard, forcing the file shut. He stepped back, chest tightening. Being in this house was already a risk. But now walking these rooms felt like walking inside the belly of the beast that took his wife. He whispered to himself, "What have I brought?" Emma into. His voice trembled in the silence. Down the hall, a floorboard creaked soft, deliberate. David turned. Someone else was awake in the estate, and he wasn't sure if they'd seen what he just discovered. The rain returned that evening, tapping against the towering glass walls of the Sterling estate like a distant memory trying to be heard. It wasn't the violent storm that had swallowed David's past, but it carried the same rhythm, soft, steady, undeniably present. Emma pressed her ear to the window and whispered, "It sounds like Grandma Lila's lullaby night." David's chest tightened. Aurora, adjusting a bottle of wine at the counter, paused just faintly at the name. She didn't comment, but something softened only for a moment, like a light flickering behind frosted glass. Dinner was already set. Polished utensils, linen napkins folded with impossible precision plates, arranged like art installations. The room echoed with small sounds, the gentle clink of china, the distant hum of rain, the slow tick of the wall clock that felt too loud in the cavernous quiet. Emma was the first to speak, her little voice slicing through the formal silence. "Daddy, can Ms. Aurora sit next to us? It feels too far." Aurora blinked, surprised. "I normally sit at the head of the table, but we're not a normal family," Emma said matter-of-factly. "We're practicing." David coughed to hide a laugh he shouldn't let out. "But Aurora..." She didn't scold. She didn't dismiss. She simply picked up her plate and moved to the side. Small chair scrape. Quiet surrender. A moment that shouldn't have mattered, but it did. For the first few minutes, the only sounds were forks against porcelain and the rain washing gently down the window. David's mind kept drifting back to the file he'd found the night before the policy changes, the dates, the unmistakable signatures. Her signature. He pushed the thought down like a bruise he wasn't ready to press. Emma cleared her throat dramatically. "Daddy, tell her the story." "What story?" Aurora asked, her tone cautious but genuinely curious. "The one about how you got lost at the fair when you were little." David sighed, rubbing his forehead. "You've heard that one 100 times." "But she hasn't." Emma insisted. Aurora raised an eyebrow, amused. "I wouldn't mind hearing it." He told the story. A simple one. A childhood mistake, a kind stranger, a reunion with a panicked mother. Nothing monumental, but the way Emma giggled, the way the rain softened the air, the way Aurora listened with genuine attention, it filled the empty, echoing room with something almost warm. When David finished, Aurora spoke more quietly than before. "I used to get lost in my own house," she said. Emma tilted her head. "How your house is huge." Aurora gave a breathy laugh. "Not this house, the one I grew up in. My father liked silence. If I made too much noise, I'd get reminders." David felt something inside him shift. She wasn't sharing for sympathy. She was sharing because Emma had pulled the truth from her without meaning to. "Did you have friends?" Emma asked. Aurora hesitated. The rain filled the pause. "Not really," she admitted. "I learned early that being close to people made things complicated." Emma reached across the table and handed her a tiny hand-drawn sticker, a crooked heart with mismatched colors. "It's okay. You can borrow mine." Aurora stared at it like she didn't know how to react to a child's generosity. Finally, she placed it gently on her napkin, as if putting it anywhere else would feel disrespectful. Later that night, after dinner ended and Emma scampered off to choose a bedtime book, Aurora retreated to the kitchen. She stood alone, hands on the marble counter, listening to the distant thump of Emma's footsteps and the softer ones of David following behind. For a moment, she felt the ghost of another dinner years ago, when she'd sat alone in silence, her father at the far end of the table, his attention fixed on quarterly reports, even while they ate. She remembered the sound of utensils, the unreachable distance, the constant pressure to impress him. This house had been a fortress of expectations for so long. And now, somehow, a janitor and a little girl had brought the sound of life back into it. She didn't know whether to welcome it or fear it. Night settled across the estate, and the rain eventually drifted into mist. Emma fell asleep easily, clinging to a stuffed rabbit. David paused at her door, brushing her hair aside and whispering, Daddy's here. Always. When he turned, he nearly collided with Aurora standing quietly in the hallway. She had a nightmare last night, Aurora said. Is it often? Sometimes, David answered. It comes and goes. A quiet moment followed, uncomfortable, but not unfriendly. You handled it well, David added. She trusts you. Aurora shifted her gaze. Children shouldn't trust me so easily. Why not, he asked. She didn't reply. She just turned away. But something fragile clung to the silence between them. Unable to sleep, David wandered downstairs toward the study. He wasn't sure what he expected to find. Maybe answers, maybe closure, maybe the confirmation he feared. The door was closed this time, but the Sterling Health emblem still glinted in his mind. He lingered outside, his breath shallow. She signed those policies, he reminded himself. She helped build the system that took Lila. Yet tonight's warmth kept tugging at him like a soft contradiction. How could the woman who soothed Emma so gently be the same woman whose pen helped seal Lila's fate? He turned away from the door, unsettled. As he walked back down the hall, a low voice echoed faintly from a nearby office. Victor. Dig deeper. Victor murmured, his tone sharp. I want everything on the janitor. Past debts, his wife's medical history, all of it. David froze, muscles rigid. Wife's medical history. Lila. The cold realization spread through him like ice. Victor wasn't just suspicious. He was digging into the one place David's heart still bled openly. And he wasn't doing it for answers, he was doing it as a weapon. David backed into the shadows, pulse pounding. Victor's steps drew closer. If Victor found what lay buried in David's past, the fragile, dangerous arrangement in this house wouldn't just crumble, it would explode. The next 2 weeks moved like a rehearsed play. Public outings, staged smiles, quiet car rides, and carefully curated appearances. Every step David took beside Aurora seemed choreographed by someone else's expectations. Flashbulbs popped, murmured voices trailed behind them, and the soft hum of cameras recording their every gesture became a kind of background music. At first he'd felt out of place in tailored suits and polished shoes. But he learned quickly, guided by Evelyn's relentless coaching and Aurora's silent expectations. And whenever he stumbled, Emma squeezed his hand, grounding him with a small, innocent certainty. Daddy, she whispered before one event, just pretend they're all nice. David wished he could. Their first major public appearance was a charity luncheon downtown. The moment they stepped through the gilded doors, a wave of soft chatter and clinking glasses washed over them. Each sound sharpened the nerves along David's spine. Aurora leaned in slightly, her voice low and controlled. Just stay close. Offer your hand when I greet people. Smile when appropriate. And for the love of God, don't look terrified. I'm not terrified, he said. You look like your tie is choking you. It is choking me, he muttered. She hid the smallest smile. David offered his arm, and she took it light, steady, almost imperceptible. But for the cameras, it looked natural, believable. Behind the clicking shutters, he felt the swirl of something he couldn't name. They moved through the event together. People whispered, they look good together. He seems grounded. Refreshing. Aurora finally found someone. It was surreal hearing strangers paint a story that wasn't real. But the strangest part was how easy it became to act the part, not because he wanted to deceive anyone, but because when Aurora glanced at him searching for steady ground in a room of sharks, something instinctive in him responded. He wasn't sure when pretending had started to feel less like pretending. The board meeting the following day changed the temperature of the entire building. Victor stood at the head of the room, a rehearsed pleasantness coating every syllable. Aurora, he said, I must commend you. The public seems to adore this new family image. The stability it conveys is remarkable. His smile held razors. Aurora responded coolly. I appreciate your enthusiasm, Victor. Oh, I'm more than enthusiastic, he replied. I'm relieved. After all, our father always believed strong leadership required a strong household. Aurora stiffened, though her voice stayed even. This isn't about father. It's about modernization, responsibility, and repairing past mistakes. Victor's eyebrow twitched. Of course. Still, one wonders how sustainable this new image is. David, seated quietly beside Aurora, as requested, felt something shift under Victor's tone, an undercurrent of threat not yet fully revealed. Later that night, after Emma fell asleep and the estate quieted, David found himself pacing. His mind wouldn't settle. Something gnawed at him, something beyond the pressure of the arrangement, something about trust, truth, and the file in Aurora's study he'd forced himself not to revisit. He finally stepped into the hallway for air, and saw Aurora sitting alone at the far end in a dim alcove lit by a single lamp. She didn't look like a CEO there. She looked tired, human, breakable in a way the world was never meant to see. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked gently. She didn't look up. "Gala preparations, board expectations, old ghosts. Take your pick." He hesitated before sitting across from her. "You handled Victor well today." "I've handled him my whole life," she replied. "He wants the company. He believes he deserves it. And he thinks my lack of a traditional family makes me unfit." David swallowed hard. "You think this arrangement will fix that?" "I think," she said slowly, "that it buys me time. And sometimes, time is the only weapon you have." A beat. Just the hum of the vent overhead, and the faint ringing in David's ears. Then Aurora spoke again, soft, almost confessional. "Do you ever wonder how many lives change because of a signature?" The question hit him like a kick to the ribs. He stiffened, the air suddenly too heavy. "What do you mean?" She exhaled a shaky breath. "When I was CFO, I signed hundreds of policy reforms, efficiency measures, risk adjustments. Some of those decisions kept the company alive. But sometimes I wonder." She paused. "I wonder who paid the price." David's fingers curled into his palms. Images flashed through him. Lila gasping for air, the monitor flatlining the denial letter with the Sterling Health logo. He couldn't tell her. Not yet. His trust wasn't ready. His pain wasn't ready. But hearing her question, hearing the honesty in it, shook something loose inside him. "I don't know," he said quietly. "But I think you're trying to do better now." Aurora looked at him, and for a heartbeat, the air between them felt unguarded. She whispered, "I hope that's enough." In another part of the city, Victor sat in a private office, reviewing a thick folder delivered by the private investigator. He flipped through pages with slow, savoring fingers. Medical records, billing statements, insurance denial notices. A name repeated again and again, Lila Cole. He looked at the timestamp of her death, then at the date of Aurora's signature on the revised insurance policy. His smile sharpened like a blade. Perfect ammunition. The next morning, an announcement hit the entire Sterling Tower. The 50th anniversary gala would be broadcast nationwide. The CEO and her husband would be front and center. Cameras, speeches, crowds, hundreds of eyes. And under it all, the pressure of a truth David wasn't ready to face, and a storm Aurora didn't yet realize was coming for her. Victor stood at his window watching the city pulse below, tapping the folder against his palm. "Tomorrow," he murmured, "everything she hides will come to light." And the sound of that whispered promise carried farther than either of them knew. The gala lights rose like a second sunrise over the city, gold warm blinding. Outside the Sterling Convention Hall, engines hummed, heels clicked, velvet ropes shifted, and cameras snapped in a steady, hungry rhythm. It was the kind of night built for spectacle, the kind of night where everyone pretended they knew how the story would end. David stood at the entrance beside Aurora, adjusting the cuffs of the sharp black suit tailored for him. The air tasted faintly of perfumed champagne and old nerves. Emma stood between them, temporarily swept away by Evelyn, to the family seating area, leaving the two adults alone for the opening procession. Aurora exhaled slowly, her breath barely audible under the low swell of orchestral music drifting from inside. Her expression was poised, but attention lived beneath it, small, contained, but unmistakable. David felt it the way a person feels a storm pressing behind the clouds. "You ready?" he murmured. Aurora kept her eyes fixed ahead. "Does anyone ever feel ready for a night like this?" "I don't," he said honestly. That earned the softest, almost invisible curve at the corner of her mouth. Then the doors opened, and a wave of sound met them. Applause, voices calling names, camera shutters fluttering like wings. As they stepped forward onto the gold-lit carpet, Aurora slipped her arm into his, without looking at him, as though her body made the decision before her mind could question it. For the cameras, they were perfect. For the world, they were solid. For each other, they were something not yet defined. Inside the hall glittered with chandeliers that pulsed with warm light. The floor echoed with the soft shuffle of tuxedos and evening gown servers, weaving through with silver trays. A jazz band played a slow, steady rhythm that seemed to settle under the skin rather than over it. David felt eyes on him, curious, assessing, surprised. People whispered behind napkins. "That must be him. He's not what I expected. Looks authentic somehow." If only they knew. Aurora stayed close, her hand resting lightly on his arm, just enough pressure to guide, not enough to trap. Her posture was regal, her chin high, but her voice, when she leaned toward him, carried a tremor only he could hear. "They expect us to dance," she said. He swallowed. "I don't dance. You do tonight." The band shifted into a slow melody, soft brass and strings weaving together. Guests drifted toward the dance floor, forming elegant pairs shaped by habit and training. Aurora took one step forward, waiting. David lifted a hand, awkward at first, then placed it gently at her waist. Her other hand slid into his, cool and deliberate. When they began to move, the world narrowed to the faint brush of her dress, the muted thrum of music, and the soft friction of shoes gliding across polished floor. "You're doing well," she whispered. "I'm counting," he whispered back. Her laugh was quiet, barely a breath, but real. As they turned, Aurora's gaze drifted to the balcony above, where Emma watched with wide-eyed delight. The sight softened Aurora's features, in a way David hadn't seen before, almost protective, almost longing. It startled him more than any flashbulb in the room. When the dance ended, applause rippled through the hall, but something heavier followed: intimacy, unspoken, unexpected. Aurora pulled her hand from his, a beat too late, as if her fingers had to remind themselves to let go. They walked together off the floor. People paused to congratulate them, praise them, admire them. David heard none of it clearly. He only heard Aurora's breath beside him, light, almost nervous. Near the edge of the room, a small table offered a brief refuge. They stepped into the semi-shadow, catching their breath. "Was that so terrible?" Aurora asked softly. "No," David admitted. "Just surprising." "What was surprising?" "That you let yourself enjoy it." She blinked at him, something raw and startled in her expression, but before either could speak further, Emma ran toward them, breathless with excitement. "You danced like the movies," she squealed, throwing her arms around David. Then without hesitation she reached for Aurora's hand. "You too." Aurora's fingers curled instinctively around the little girl's. For a moment, the three of them stood together, and the room seemed to hush around them. It was dangerous, that moment. Too full, too warm, too real. Behind the curtains of the backstage area, Victor watched from a distance, his jaw tight. He didn't care for warmth, or sentiment, or the way the crowd responded to Aurora as if she'd already won something tonight. He touched the USB drive in his pocket, the one containing the documents, the email chains, the time-stamped policy revisions. He smiled. She had no idea what tomorrow would bring. The program resumed. A massive screen rolled down behind the stage. The host introduced a tribute to 50 years of Sterling Group's history. Applause filled the hall as old photographs flickered across the screen. Founders' expansions, hospital wings, community drives. The music swelled, the lights dimmed. As Aurora prepared to walk onto the stage for her closing speech, David stepped behind her, gently adjusting the edge of her gown so she wouldn't trip. She looked back at him, startled by the small, simple care. "Thank you," she whispered. "You've got this," he said steady. For a fraction of a second she believed him. She stepped onto the stage, greeted by applause that rose like a tide. David watched from the wings, his pulse beating in rhythm with the lights. Halfway through her speech, he saw her hand trembling ever so slightly at the edge of the podium. Then she steadied it. She always steadied it. When the gala ended, she slipped away to the balcony overlooking the city. The wind brushed against the glass, humming softly. David followed a few minutes later, stepping into the cool night. "You know," he said quietly, "you looked human up there." Aurora let out a soft, shaky breath. "That terrifies me more than anything." He draped his suit jacket over her bare shoulders, automatic protective. She didn't push it away. For one long moment, they stood inches apart, the city glowing beneath them. Something unspoken stretched between them, soft, electric, impossibly fragile. They leaned in, and her phone rang. "Victor." Aurora answered slowly. "Aurora." Victor said, voice smooth as glass. "The board meets tomorrow at 9, and I think you'll want your husband present." A chill slid down her spine. David saw it in her eyes. Something was shifting. Something was coming. Aurora lowered the phone, gripping the railing. David stepped closer. "What did he say?" She swallowed hard. "Tomorrow," she whispered, "everything changes." The boardroom felt colder than usual, though no one had touched the thermostat. Maybe it was the way the morning light filtered through the high windows, thin, sharp, unforgiving. Or maybe it was the tension thick enough to dull every other sensation. David stepped inside beside Aurora, each footstep too loud on the polished floor. The quiet hum of overhead lights buzzed like static. This wasn't a meeting. It was an ambush waiting for its cue. Aurora carried herself with practiced grace, but David saw the stiffness in her shoulders, the tiny hitch in her breath. He didn't touch her, but he walked close enough that she could feel the warmth of a presence she'd reluctantly begun to trust. Victor sat at the head of the table, hands folded, a smile stretched thin across his face. "Good morning, everyone," he said, voice smooth as lacquer. "Today, we celebrate transparency." That word tasted wrong in David's ears. One of the executives cleared her throat. "Aurora, shall we proceed with your quarterly update?" "Actually," Victor interrupted, "I've prepared a short presentation first." Aurora's jaw tightened. David felt it rather than saw it. Victor rose, stepping toward the large digital screen at the front of the room. With a tap on the remote, the screen flickered to life, bright enough that David shielded his eyes for a second. At first, photos from the gala appeared. Elegant, flattering. Aurora and David smiling, dancing, greeting attendees. Sterling Group's 50th anniversary. Victor narrated. A tremendous success. A strong public image. A united leadership family. David sensed the room shifting, anticipation thickening. Then Victor clicked again. The images disappeared. A new slide appeared. A name, a date, a medical code. Lila Cole, insurance claim denied. David's breath stopped. Aurora's entire body froze. Victor spoke with manufactured sympathy. "This is where the real story begins." He clicked again. Medical records scrolled on screen, paired with timestamps, billing statements, policy revision documents bearing the unmistakable Sterling Health logo. The same logo David had stared at 7 years ago in a hospital soaked with grief. His stomach twisted. Victor continued. 7 years ago, Ms. Cole suffered a rare pregnancy complication. Emergency care was required. However, due to amended policies, Sterling Health did not cover her treatment. She passed. Silence hit the boardroom like a dropped stone. Victor let the stillness stretch, savoring it. Now he said almost gently, "Let's see who approved that policy." Another click. A scanned signature filled the screen. Aurora Sterling. The room inhaled sharply. Even the lights seemed to buzz louder. Aurora stared at the signature, her face draining of color. For a moment she looked impossibly young, like the child she'd once been in her father's empire, taught to make decisions that echoed beyond her understanding. "I didn't know," she whispered. Victor turned to her slowly. "But you signed it." David felt something hot rise in his chest. Anger, grief, betrayal so sharp it made his hands tremble. The room tilted. A ringing started in his ears. He forced words out. You were the one who." Aurora flinched as if struck. "David, I swear to you I didn't know who—" "That doesn't change what happened," Victor said smoothly. "Nor the fact that your marriage appears to be a calculated facade, a performance crafted to manipulate this board." He clicked again. Photos of Aurora and David entering events, holding hands, smiling, Emma between them. Heartwarming, Victor commented. But fake, fabricated, a desperate attempt to meet the terms of father's will. Murmurs broke out. Chairs shifted. Aurora's voice cracked slightly as she said, "This is not authentic." Victor finished. "Indeed, just as your leadership is not rooted in integrity. A woman who signs away human lives should not lead a healthcare empire." David's fist clenched, nails cutting into his palm. He wasn't defending Aurora, not yet, but something about Victor's smugness scraped against every nerve. "You don't get to weaponize my wife's death," he snapped. Victor arched a brow. "Your wife's death is already a weapon. Aurora handed it to me years ago." Aurora's breath hitched. "David, please listen." He looked at her then, really looked. Her eyes were glassy, terrified, desperate. Not for her position, not for her pride. For him, for Emma, for the truth she had just realized she had been complicit in. He felt something fracture inside him. "How many signatures?" he asked, voice shaking. "How many people did you hurt without knowing?" Aurora's voice broke. "Too many." The honesty gutted him even deeper. "But I didn't know," she repeated, weaker this time. "I was following directives. I was young. David's head shook slowly. "You were powerful. And people paid the price." Her face crumpled, not dramatically, but quietly, like someone losing the last piece of ground under their feet. Victor stepped forward triumphantly. "I propose a vote of no confidence in Aurora Sterling, effective immediately." The board murmured, shifting, whispering. Aurora stared at her lap hands, trembling. She didn't argue, didn't defend herself. She looked hollow, as though absorbing the truth of her past for the very first time. David couldn't breathe. He stood abruptly, the chair scraping back with a harsh echo. Aurora's eyes shot up to him, full of raw apology. She didn't know how to speak. He broke. He turned and walked toward the exit, each step heavy, too loud, echoing the sound of grief he'd carried for years. "Aurora," he heard her whisper behind him, voice cracking on his name. He didn't look back. The door shut behind him with a muted thud, the kind of sound that ends something. Aurora remained seated, staring at the blank screen as Victor shut off the projector. The room emptied slowly, chairs scraping, voices low. When the last board member left, the lights dimmed automatically. She sat alone in the dark, the ghost of her signature burning in her mind. Just her breath, and the low fading hum of the machine that had illuminated her past. Far down the hall, David stopped, leaning against the wall, his chest tight. He wasn't sure whether he'd walked away from Aurora, or from a truth too painful to accept. Silence had a different sound in David's apartment. It wasn't the cold, engineered quiet of the Sterling estate. It wasn't the sharp, echoing quiet of the boardroom, where truth had detonated like a weapon. It was small, breathing, human. But tonight it felt too small to contain the weight of what had happened. The door shut softly behind him, and Emma, the faint thump of worn hinges, filling the narrow entryway. Emma clutched her stuffed rabbit against her chest, sensing the heaviness in her father's steps. "Daddy," she whispered, "did we do something wrong?" He knelt and pulled her close, breathing in the familiar scent of her hair, shampoo and crayons and childhood. "No, sweetheart. We didn't do anything wrong." But he couldn't finish the sentence. Because the next part, someone else did, felt too complicated for her world. Emma's arms tightened around him before she slipped off toward her room, rabbit in tow. The door clicked shut, leaving David in the half-lit apartment with the hum of the old refrigerator and the distant traffic outside the window. He sat heavily at the small table, elbows resting on its chipped edge. His hands trembled, palms pressing hard into his forehead. In the boardroom, he hadn't cried. Now alone, the tears finally came, not loud, but deep, pulled from a place he'd buried under 7 years of survival. "What was I thinking?" he whispered. Walking into her world. Trusting any part of it. But the whisper hurt because it wasn't completely true. He hadn't trusted her world. He'd begun slowly, foolishly to trust her. The tiny TV in the corner hissed to life when he turned it on, the screen flickering, before stabilizing into a news recap of the Sterling scandal. The anchor's voice was too calm, too polished. Sources confirm the board is evaluating leadership concerns within Sterling Group after new information surfaced regarding legacy insurance policies. CEO Aurora Sterling declined to comment. Then it came. A photo of Lila. A headline: "Woman denied life-saving treatment under Sterling policy. Dies at 29. His own name mentioned beneath it. Lila's death. His grief had been reduced to a news segment. A trivia card for the evening broadcast. David shut off the TV before the tightness in his throat could choke him. He pressed his palms to his eyes, letting the darkness settle. He hadn't asked for a public reckoning. He'd wanted closure. He'd wanted justice. But not like this. Not with Aurora staring at her own signature, like it was a ghost she'd never expected to see again. He couldn't shake the look on her face, shattered, unarmored. Not defensive, devastated. He didn't know what to do with that. Across the city, Aurora sat alone on the floor of the Sterling estate living room, the hardwood cool beneath her palms. Her hair, always immaculate, fell loosely around her face as missed calls flashed on her phone screen. PR firm, legal team board members, Victor. She ignored all of it. Her mind replayed the moment her signature appeared on the screen, how her stomach sank, how her heart seemed to split along a fault line she never knew was there. She whispered into the empty room. "How many people did I fail?" Her voice cracked in the middle, and she didn't try to steady it. She'd lived her whole life armoring herself with perfection, leadership, efficiency, composure. But tonight, every piece of armor felt like a lie forged by a younger version of herself who never stopped to question the system her father trained her to defend. She remembered him saying, "Numbers don't lie, Aurora. People do." She'd thought following his rules meant she was strong, but numbers had consequences. And tonight, she had seen one of them staring back at her with a broken heart. Back in the apartment, David sat on the edge of his bed, the springs creaking softly as he leaned forward. Emma's quiet breathing drifted from the next room, steady, comforting. He exhaled shakily. Anger still lived inside him, sharp and hot, but alongside it grew something unwelcome: understanding. Aurora hadn't known Lila's name, hadn't known the faces behind the figures, hadn't known she was helping build a system that would swallow someone like Lila whole. But ignorance didn't erase responsibility, and regret didn't rewrite history. He rubbed his temples. His thoughts tumbled between fury and compassion, between past and present. Aurora was not innocent, but she wasn't a monster either. So what am I supposed to do with that? He wondered. His phone buzzed beside him. A message from an unknown number. "Are you okay?" He didn't respond. Not because he wanted to punish her, he didn't know what he felt yet. Responses required clarity, and clarity was the one thing he didn't have. Hours later, long after midnight, the quiet was broken by the soft click of Emma's bedroom door. Bare feet padded across the hall until she appeared beside him, clutching her rabbit. "Daddy," she whispered. "I can't sleep." He lifted her into his lap, cradling her gently. "Bad dream again." She nodded into his shirt. A small, warm, trembling nod. "Do you want some water?" "No." She swallowed. "I want Ms. Aurora." David froze. Emma continued, voice tiny and sincere. "She's sad. I can feel it. Are we allowed to talk to her anymore? His throat tightened. How do you explain betrayal to a child who only understands compassion? She hurt us, honey, he said gently. Emma leaned back to look at him. But she didn't mean to. Some people hurt you when they're hurting too. The words sank into him like a stone, dropped into still water rippling outward. Emma yawned, resting her head against his chest. I think she's lonely. David felt something break open inside him, a small, flickering truth he didn't want to admit. She might be, he whispered. Emma snuggled closer. Maybe she needs a friend. Maybe we all do, he thought. He held Emma until her breathing slowed again, until the apartment returned to its soft, fragile quiet. At 2:14 a.m., his phone buzzed once more. This time it wasn't Aurora. It was her number, but the voice was Emma's. Hi, it's me. I just want to ask if you're lonely. David's heart dropped. She'd found the phone. She'd dialed on instinct. He waited, breath stuck in his chest. A moment later, Aurora's voice, trembling raw, came through the speaker. Yes, very. Emma whispered back, half asleep, Daddy's lonely too. Aurora inhaled sharply. Something fragile, invisible, and undeniable connected the two households in the quiet of that hour. A lifeline neither adult dared reach for, but a child did. For the first time since the boardroom implosion, David didn't hang up. He didn't speak, but he didn't sever the line either. And on the other end, Aurora stayed, breathing, hurting, waiting. Morning arrived without mercy. Aurora had not slept. She sat at her dining table with a half-finished cup of coffee gone cold, the spoon resting inside it like an unanswered question. Outside, the early sunlight filtered through tall windows, painting thin stripes across the polished floor. The house felt cavernous again, silent, weighty, as if it too was waiting for her to decide who she intended to be. Her phone buzzed non-stop. PR director, head of communications, legal counsel, board members, all offering approaches, strategies, denials, excuses. Blame the old administration. Say you didn't know. The signature was procedural. Make it unclear who approved what. Distance yourself. Every suggestion felt like a fresh layer of filth. She turned the phone face down. Her father had built a company known for strength and success, but also for its coldness, its ruthless efficiency, its ability to turn human pain into a line item. She had spent years trying to undo some of that legacy without admitting how deeply she'd once been molded by it. But now there was no hiding behind numbers, behind legacy, behind that old familiar shield of, I didn't know. Today, she had to choose. Hide behind the system that raised her, or dismantle the part of it she helped reinforce. She stood trembling and whispered to the empty room, no more lies. The words steadied her spine. When she walked into the press hall later that afternoon, the air vibrated with tension. Camera shutters clicked in rapid bursts. Voices murmured like a restless tide. The lights were harsh hot against her face. Every sound echoed off the stone walls. Her legal team stood behind her, stiff and watchful. PR staff exchanged nervous glances. Aurora approached the podium step by step, each heel click magnified by the microphones. She didn't look at her notes. She barely touched the sides of the lectern. She simply breathed a long, steady inhale before speaking. Thank you all for coming. Her voice trembled on the first word, but she didn't let it stop her. There are things I need to say today, truths I owe to this company, to our employees, and to the families affected by decisions made under Sterling Health. A wave of whispers rippled through the audience. Aurora lifted her chin. 7 years ago, policies were introduced that limited emergency coverage for certain medical complications. These policies were signed during my tenure as Chief Financial Officer. I approved them. Flashes exploded. Microphones shifted. Someone gasped loudly. Aurora continued, her voice now steadier than her heartbeat. I did so while believing efficiency was more important than empathy, because that was how I was raised, trained, and rewarded. But ignorance is not innocence. And unintentional harm is still harm. She paused, letting the weight settle. One of the lives affected by these policies was Lila Cole, David's wife. The name tasted like truth and regret in equal measure. "I have read her record," Aurora said. "She deserved better. Her husband and daughter deserved better. And the fault is mine." Gasps. Questions shouted. Cameras blinking like frantic stars. She lifted her hand, gently silencing the room. "I will not defend these decisions. I will not shift blame to systems or subordinates. I will not bury this under corporate language or legal strategy. I am responsible." Her voice thinned for a second, but she pressed on. "To honor the lives affected, Sterling Health will create a restitution fund and an independent review board to overhaul emergency coverage policies. No family should be left in fear or grief because of a financial form or a denied claim." She let that promise linger. "And regarding my position as CEO, I leave the decision entirely to the board. If they determine I am unfit to lead this company, I will accept their vote. Transparency demands it." Her PR team looked stunned. Her lawyers looked horrified. But Aurora didn't regret a single word. She stepped back from the podium. Her hands shook. Her breath trembled. But for the first time since childhood, she felt free. While she walked off stage, David stood in his small apartment watching the live broadcast on the flickering television. Emma sat on the couch beside him, swinging her legs absent-mindedly, her eyes fixed on the screen. Aurora's voice carried through the old speakers like a confession meant for him alone. David felt emotion pour into him, anger still present, but softened by something impossible to ignore. Honesty, responsibility, courage. She didn't hide. She didn't spin it. She didn't pretend. She said Lila's name. On national television. As a person, not a statistic. And the part that shook him most was that Aurora looked broken by it, broken, in a way that suggested she'd finally opened a door inside herself she never dared touch. Emma rested her head on his shoulder. "Daddy." She tried to fix it. He swallowed hard. "Yeah," he whispered. She did. He didn't know what forgiveness looked like, not yet. But the ice around his grief cracked a little. Backstage, Aurora walked down a dim hallway, head bowed, breath shaky. Reporters' questions still echoed in the distance. She turned a corner. David stood there. She froze. He didn't look angry. He didn't look forgiving. He looked human, hurt, uncertain, changing. They stood in silence for a long moment. Aurora's voice broke first. "I can't bring her back," she whispered. "I can't undo what I signed, but I refuse to hide behind excuses. Not anymore." He nodded slowly, chest rising with a deep, conflicted breath. "I know," he said quietly. "I heard you." Her eyes glistened. "David, I'm sorry." He looked at the ground, jaw tight. "Sorry doesn't fix everything." "I know," she whispered again. But he added, lifting his gaze to hers, "It means something." Her breath stuttered. A tiny involuntary catch. "Does it?" she asked, barely audible. "Yes," he said. The hallway stretched around them, silent, except for the low hum of overhead lights. A space suspended between past and future, hurt and healing. Neither stepped forward. Neither stepped back. They simply stood there, two people fractured by a shared history they never intended to have. Aurora opened her mouth as if to say more, but a voice echoed from down the hall. "The board is convening now." David and Aurora turned toward the sound. Whatever happened next would decide everything. The boardroom felt impossibly still, like the air itself was waiting. Aurora stood at the center of the long table, shoulders squared, but David could see the slightest tremor in the way her fingers brushed the papers before her. She wasn't nervous for her title. She was nervous for her truth. Victor leaned back in his chair, confident fingers steepled, as though the outcome had already been written. Other board members avoided Aurora's gaze, some out of discomfort, some out of shame, shame for the complicity they'd never dare name aloud. The chairwoman cleared her throat. "Before we vote, does anyone wish to speak?" Victor rose with theatrical calm. We can all appreciate Aurora's performance today, but a CEO must protect the company, not tarnish it. Her emotional confession may have played well in the press hall, but we are guardians of stability, not sentiment. A few heads nodded. Victor continued. We need a leader who will preserve Sterling's reputation, someone disciplined, someone who understands that emotional theatrics are not strategy. Aurora inhaled steady and deliberate. When she spoke, her voice carried no shake this time, only clarity. You speak of reputation, she said softly. But what good is a company's name if people suffer under it? She lifted her gaze, sweeping the room. I made mistakes. I owned them. And I corrected them not because it was convenient, but because it was right. A murmur moved across the table. Aurora continued. If you believe leadership is about pretending perfection, then vote me out. But if you believe leadership is the willingness to face the truth and change, then let me keep leading. For the first time, Victor's composure cracked. His jaw twitched. Then something unexpected happened. A gray-haired board member, quiet, dignified, stood slowly. He adjusted his glasses before speaking. I worked with your father for 30 years, he said. I watched him make decisions that protected the company, but hurt people. And I watched you grow up under that shadow. His voice softened. Today is the first time I've seen a Sterling lead with courage instead of fear. He looked at Victor. We've hidden behind numbers long enough. Another board member rose, then another. The vote was called. Hands lifted one after another, slow but steady. Victor's stayed down. He lost by a landslide. Aurora didn't smile. She exhaled. A long, quiet breath that carried years of inherited weight. The chairwoman nodded. Aurora will remain CEO. Victor stood abruptly, his chair scraping the floor. This is a mistake. All of you will regret, Victor, the chairwoman said firmly. Please leave the room. He threw one final glare at Aurora, a promise of future battles, but the door closed on him before he could speak again. When silence returned, all eyes drifted to Aurora. She didn't look triumphant. She looked steady, changed, real. David felt something shift inside him, a slow, fragile thaw. She had fought not for the company, not for power, but for truth. Several months later, spring sunlight warmed the newly renovated wing of St. Bridget's Hospital. Children laughed in the hallway, the squeal of small shoes against polished linoleum, creating a gentle background chorus. A fresh plaque gleamed near the entrance, Lila Cole Memorial Wing. In partnership with the Sterling Foundation. David stood before it with Emma's small hand wrapped around his. She held a bouquet of wildflowers, bright, imperfect, beautiful. Just like Lila used to like. Aurora approached quietly, a rare softness in her steps. She didn't speak at first. She simply placed her hand on the plaque, fingers brushing over Lila's name, as if apologizing through touch alone. David broke the silence. She would have liked this. She believed hospitals should feel hopeful. Aurora's voice was gentle. I'm trying to build a world she would have trusted. Emma tugged on Aurora's sleeve. Ms. Aurora, can we go inside now? Aurora knelt to Emma's height. You can call me Aurora, sweetheart. Just Aurora. Emma beamed and took both adults by the hands, pulling them toward the doors, like she was guiding them somewhere they had all been too afraid to go. Inside, families waited for care, some anxious, some relieved. Nurses greeted them warmly, and a mural of Lila smiling down at a child decorated the far wall. David stopped at the sight. His breath hitched. Aurora hesitated beside him. David. I didn't want to make this wing about me, or the company. I wanted it to be about her, and the people like her who deserved better. He nodded, swallowing emotion that swelled too high to speak. After a long, quiet moment, he finally managed, I'm still hurt. I probably will be for a long time. Aurora's eyes shimmered, but she didn't look away. I know, and forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. I wouldn't want it to, she said. Forgetting would erase who she was. He studied her face, the sincerity, the humility, the transformation carved by choices instead of circumstance. I can't promise I'll ever be perfect at this, Aurora added. At relationships, or family, or whatever we are. David surprised himself with a small, soft laugh. Neither can I. Emma rushed back to them, breathless and excited. They have ice cream in the kids' lounge. Daddy, can we have some Aurora too? He and Aurora shared a glance, uncertain, tender new. Aurora crouched beside Emma. Do families eat ice cream together? Emma nodded vigorously. All the good ones. Aurora looked to David again. Well, are we a good one? For a moment, David saw everything. The grief that shaped him, the truth that reshaped her, the little girl who bridged their worlds, and the fragile possibility growing between them. He squeezed Emma's hand, then offered the other to Aurora. We're working on it, he said softly. And that's enough for me. Aurora's fingers slid into his, not as a contract, not as a performance, but as a choice. A real one. The three of them walked down the bright hallway, footsteps blending with laughter, the scent of fresh paint mingling with spring air drifting through open windows. Nothing about their story was perfect. Nothing about it was simple. But it was theirs, born from truth, rebuilt through courage, shaped by healing. And as Emma tugged them toward the ice cream machine, Aurora leaned close and whispered almost to herself, a different kind of family, but one I'm grateful for. David smiled, feeling warmth settle in places that had been cold for years. Some endings aren't fairy tales. Some endings are beginnings with their eyes open. And this walked hand in hand down a hospital hallway that bore Lila's name was exactly the kind of beginning they all deserved. Before we end tonight's journey, I want to leave you with this. Sometimes the hardest apologies are the ones we owe to ourselves. Sometimes forgiveness is not about forgetting the past, but about choosing not to let it chain down our future. David, Aurora, and little Emma remind us of something powerful, that healing is not a straight line, that love can grow in the cracks of old wounds, and that even the coldest systems can be changed when one person chooses courage over comfort. If you've ever lived through a moment like this, a loss that reshaped you, a truth that broke something open in your life, a second chance you never expected, I'd love to hear your story. Your voice might be exactly what someone else needs to feel less alone tonight. Tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? Our storytelling family spans cities, countries, time zones, and I'm always amazed at how these stories bring us all a little closer. If this story touched your heart, inspired you, or gave you something to hold on to, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps these stories find more people who might need them. Thank you truly for spending your precious time with me today. Until the next story, take care of yourself. Hold your loved ones a little closer, and remember, even in the most unexpected places, hope can still find its way home.